At the same time, we have to think about the money required and technical support needed to learn how to start and grow a successful business. So, if you are interested in starting a cannabis business, investing in a cannabis business, and or understanding how the economic restorative justice legislation will benefit the Black community, you are in the right place. We have an exceptional lineup of panelists with us today that includes Natalie Papillon, founder and executive director of the Equity Organization, the epitomes of each one teach one. CJ Wallace and Willie Mack of Think Big, and Kareem Webb, founder and CEO of The Fourth Movement. Sharing her thoughts on the effects of legalization on current cannabis entrepreneurs is our shadow on the flyer legacy operator. Deborah Hoskins, Esquire, will talk about some of the long list of things that are needed to be considered to start and run a cannabis business. And you know, a politician cares about their community when they give their time. So we are blessed to have New York State Senator Sen Benjamin, chairman of Committee on Revenue and Budget. I'd like to tell all of our viewers on Facebook and YouTube and Zoom to please ask questions in the chat. We are aggregating and we will have a question and answer period between each presenter and hopefully time permitting at the end of the show. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Regina Smith. Regina.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We are pleased to have you in such a distinguished group of panelists. So the Harlem Business Alliance is an organization that is truly about Black business empowerment, and we believe that there can be no social justice without economic justice, and that's critically important in this space. And it also is critically important that community-based organizations that have long ties to the community be engaged in this industry. So as recreational cannabis is legalized, we look to ensure that the communities most harmed, and Black people in particular, because in New York State, the communities most harmed have been Black people and continue to be Black people. We, as the Harlem Business Alliance, decided to focus specifically on the needs of Black people because we saw that the other tribes and minorities were focusing on the needs of their tribes. So, for example, there's a Latinx roundtable, and then you have here in New York, people from Yemen who own a lot of these bodegas. They have their own groups, and the Dominicans and everyone else. So as the only organization in New York City and possibly in New York State that is focusing on specifically on Black people, we welcome you this evening to this webinar.
Thank you, Regina. I see Senator Benjamin is online. I also see that you look like you're muted, so please unmute yourself. Hey, Senator, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Please give us a few words to start us out.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having this. I'm gonna thank you, Regina, HBA. You know, for me, I am a big supporter of recreational marijuana. I am equally as big supporter of making sure that our community benefits from the legalization of recreational marijuana. And so for me, you know, one of the reasons why I have yet to sign on to any of the bills in the legislature is because I'm still not sufficiently convinced that the bills we are presently have on the table meets the needs that I think have to be met. And so what I'm hoping to do is be part of a conversation where I'm dealing with, and this is something that I've said before, where I'm dealing with the right people to make sure that equity is appropriately handled in our community, particularly Black people and Black entrepreneurs having a serious piece of the pie. And so until I feel comfortable that's the case, I'm gonna hold out. But I'm very committed to this happening. I just want to make sure it's not just about the social equity in terms of looking at expunging records, et cetera, et cetera. I want to make sure that there's some entrepreneurs who are really going to benefit from our community as it relates to this. So that's my agenda. That's why I'm here, and I'm looking forward to hearing the different thoughts and opinions from those on the call.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Senator. We are so happy to have you. And the first person I would like to introduce is Natalie Papillon. She is the founder and executive director of the Equity Organization. Natalie, please tell us about the Equity Organization and cannabis, race, and criminal justice reform.
Hi, well, thank you first off for having me. I'm so heartened to have this esteemed panel be brought together to talk about what has always been, and I think recent events has shown us, a critically important part of conversations around racial justice, social equity, and criminal justice reform more broadly. I run the Equity Organization. It is a New York-based nonprofit, and we are focused on drug policy, specifically cannabis policy, and the intersection of criminal justice reform. So we know that there's been a lot of talk as of late around things we can do to curb police brutality and police violence, especially in Black communities. We've been hearing a lot about our bloated system of mass incarceration, but what we haven't heard spoken about too often is the way our drug policies, and specifically our cannabis-related policies, have not just contributed to this bloated system, they've actually been sort of the animating factor for mass incarceration. And this is particularly true in New York, and particularly true actually in Harlem. I will save you too many stats, but I'm a big believer in the fact that you can't know where you're going until you look where you came from. And one of the things that I think is critically important to understand is the war on drugs and the war on cannabis specifically did not start in 1971 with Nixon's declaration. It actually started way before that in the early 20th century and a bit before. And one of the things that we often hear about the war on drugs and cannabis prohibition is that the enforcement has been racially biased. And that is true. We know that in New York, the Department of Health has done a lot of surveying, and they found that white New York residents are twice as likely to consume cannabis. But in every year on record, 90 to 95% of all cannabis-related policing encounters have been between the New York Police Department and Black or Latinx people, specifically Black and or Latinx young men between the ages of 18 to 24. And though New York has passed 3 different decriminalization measures starting in 1978, the loopholes in some of those laws have made it so that marijuana-related encounters were the foundation of broken windows policing. And when I say that, I'm not being hyperbolic. In every year we have on record, starting in early 2000, the number of cannabis arrests went from around 6,000 in the 1990s to 60,000 in 2010. And this was deliberate. And one of the things, an anecdote I like to share with people is, well, how could that be true? New York decriminalized cannabis possession in 1978. That's true, but there was a loophole that allowed police to arrest people or cite people if they had cannabis in plain view. That's the exact language. And you'll see that language come up in police reports even today. Well, when stop and frisk was the policy du jour in the NYPD, one of the things that the police officers were instructed to do were to stop Black men, mostly in Harlem and other sort of Black communities in New York, and ask them to empty their pockets. If they had weed in their pockets, it was now in plain view and it's an arrestable offense. And that is why 90 to 95% of all cannabis-related policing encounters are in Black neighborhoods, in brown neighborhoods, and predominantly with Black men. And so I'm of the opinion, after, I'm a historian of this, I'm of the opinion that decriminalization doesn't go far enough. Even if we remove some of the criminal penalties for marijuana possession, they are not enough. I was just on the NYPD's open data project not an hour ago, and there were only a couple hundred cannabis-related arrests. There were 4,000 criminal summonses issued in the last 3 months in New York City. 94.2% of those summons went to Black or brown people, mostly Black people. So it's clear that while legalization will not be a panacea for police brutality or for racial disparities in sentencing and things like that, it is on us to understand how interwoven the history of cannabis prohibition has been to police brutality and the over-policing of Black communities. And we need to center drug policy reform, and specifically cannabis policy reform, at all conversations we're having today around policing and criminal justice. So that's my spiel. I'm very excited to be with you all today. I think the one other thing I'll add is cannabis was not always illegal in the US. In fact, it was commonly used. Colonial governments required colonists to grow hemp for industrial use, and doctors in Main Street, USA were very, very frequently prescribing cannabis for small ailments up until the 1920s. Now, in the 1920s, there was a man who was very racist and very bigoted and also quite power hungry. And he saw that there was a lot of cannabis use in the American Southwest after the Mexican Revolution. And that was because we saw a lot of Mexican immigration to the Southwest. And he saw that jazz singers in New Orleans and other Southern port cities were quite frequently consuming cannabis because, quite frankly, it was cheaper and easier to access than alcohol. He saw that. He got very racially anxious, as some media sources would say today, about the changing demographics, and he decided to criminalize cannabis. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say it was entirely racially motivated. He testified before Congress in 1937, and some of the quotes from this testimony, this is in the congressional record: "Coloreds with big lips lure white women with jazz and marijuana. Jazz, their satanic music, is driven by marijuana, and marijuana smoking by white women makes them want to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and others." And then most damningly, perhaps, "Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races." So it's not just the enforcement that's been racist. The entire conception of prohibiting access to the substance has been racist at its very, very core. So, as we go on and talk about the opportunities around legalization, we need to remember that we can't just look at the past 50 years, which have been devastating. We also have to understand that this is not a matter of shifting ideologies or a different cultural context. This is a matter of blowing up a law that should have never been on the books in the first place.
Natalie, thank you so much. I mean, knowing where we came from in order to get where we're going is very important. Daryl, do we have any questions out there for
we
us?
do have questions, and this actually can be answered by either Ms. Natalie or Senator Benjamin. Hello, Senator Benjamin.
How you doing, bro?
The first question is, what, if any, legislation is proposed regarding the expungement of criminal records for ex-offenders with marijuana convictions?
So, first of all, can I just ask a quick question? I apologize, Dar. I don't want to. Quick question, because what Natalie just mentioned, and this is probably not unrelated. We decriminalized marijuana arrests for 2 ounces and less. Are you saying are the arrests that you're referring to for the last few months those of folks of having 2 ounces or more, or is the law not being applied? What's the?
I think the arrests, which I think only numbered around 200 in the past 3 months, are being applied for marijuana related sales as opposed to possession. So intent to distribute, and that's still not decriminalized as best I can tell, because that's the code that the NYPD is sort of using. And so that's marijuana possession in the third with intent to distribute, I believe. And those numbers have come down from 60,000. So we're very excited about that. But I also think something really important to notice is we've just shifted the penalties to civil fees and fines, which are, you know, better, but at the same time, we know how easily someone misses a court date or they aren't aware that something's due at a certain time, then they have a warrant out for their arrest, and then they're actually sort of brought in the next, stop and frisk encounter, and we know how frequently and where those occur. So it's not a panacea, I guess, is my opinion.
Got it. Sorry, Daryl. So I think I'm gonna have to ask Natalie to answer that question because I am not an expert on the expungement bills, though I'm supportive. So Natalie, you know the answer to that question?
Yes. So last year, the legislature passed another decriminalization bill for under 2 ounces. And with that bill came measures for automatic expungement, which is amazing. In most other states who have done this, they've had to be quite manual. And these systems are a bit outdated and tended not to happen, or you had to actually request and go through the process and hire a lawyer to get your record expunged. So New York is currently expunging all low-level cannabis possession arrests that occurred pre-2019, and that is an automatic process. You have to call the court system to figure out if it has been processed, because it has taken a year and it will take a few more months to process all of those. But that was what the DAs of different boroughs were hoping to accomplish by September of this year.
Okay, thank you. Now the other question, either or, Senator Benjamin or Ms. Papillon, how can we be kept abreast of legislation and New York State's plans for implementation?
So right now, you're talking about recreational marijuana, just talking about that specifically. Right now, we do have, right now we haven't been discussing the bill. There are still work going on and conversations happening, as I'm sure everyone knows. I'm happy to keep HBA apprised of the conversations in the Senate because I'm part of those conversations. I don't know a better way than to just have legislators keeping folks apprised. I know that the Drug Policy Alliance and other groups are sort of on the they're very knowledgeable about where most of these things are as well. But I'm happy to play a role to keep at least HBA and those who are affiliated with this network in the Senate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I'm going to turn it back over to you. There are no further questions right now. And thank you so much, Senator Benjamin and Ms. Papillon.
Oh, thank you. Child, please. Daryl. I'm going to quorum. I'd like to share my screen, please, if you could. I'm just going to do a short presentation following up on what we just heard, and maybe I won't because I can't share my screen at the moment. So why don't we move on and start talking to, as I said, one of my epitomes of each one teach one. Have you guys heard of that terminology? Each one teach one, CJ and Willie?
Yes.
Yes. So that's why I say that, right? I am so proud of you guys as the grandmother on the screen.
Thank you so much.
So why don't you tell us about Think Big and anything else you want to tell us?
Man, yeah. Okay, so Think Big for me really starts when I was a kid, growing up with my younger brother and my older sister. We all lived in Atlanta, and my mom was recording her second or third album when we lived there. And for those who don't know, my name is CJ Wallace, son of Notorious B.I.G. My mom was Faith Evans. And yeah, cannabis was always around. It was always present in the studio when my parents were recording. And when we were kids, we just loved to be in the studio sessions. And some of my earliest memories were just being in the studio with my mom and my dad, the man who raised me, Todd Rusaw. And yeah, music was always something that just inspired me. And as we moved to LA and I got through high school, and my youngest brother, who was born with autism, started to grow older, cannabis was always one of the, first tools of medication that my mom was curious about, as opposed to, prescription drugs like Ritalin and stuff like that. So yeah, early on, even before it was legal out here, we were always using cannabis as a tool for health and wellness. And there were a lot of, side effects and products that were not consistent all the time. And, it was a lot of trial and error in understanding, what my youngest brother needed. And once I met Willie Mack here, and we heard a little bit about Jaden's Juice and a couple different CBD-focused products, we started to see a huge change in not only his behavior, but just his attitude and just day-to-day, wanting to complete certain tasks and do his homework, and his attentiveness and awareness and just paying attention started to change. And yeah, that, after we met Will, and before then, I didn't really see myself as a cannabis activist or someone who would be sitting in discussions like this with all of these great people talking about how we can really, legalize and, have people that look like us in this industry. I never pictured that. Me and Willie never, really thought that would be the focus until, we really sat down and came up with the idea of Think Big, which is the social justice platform that we're supporting. And that'll be, everything. It's really all it's all we think about. It's all we really live for. And, for the past 2 years, just how can we spread the knowledge of what cannabis is, and, Natalie, all of that stuff that you were talking about, it just fired me up, you know what I mean? Hearing people who are just as passionate about all of this stuff as we are, makes me really excited. So, yeah, we can, Willie can also kind of explain a little bit more.
He's right. So much of it, and that is, especially your point, one of the things that we were talking about the last few weeks, the last month, as we, watched the George Floyd and the sort of protests that started, and the conversation around defunding the police was the biggest part of this conversation that I think the general that's missing is the police are in our neighborhoods and have been arresting us, and we're in jail because of cannabis. And that's the point. And for the last 100 years, and we're not talking about that on a national scale as part of this sort of defunding the police. If you remove the cannabis as scheduled as a illegal drug, and you change that, there's so much money you're going to save in not even the policing system, the legal system, between judges and courts and bail and bond and all the time, all this system that was built for 100 years, bringing us and arresting us and putting us in jail for a plant. If that gets taken away, that already is going to save a significant amount of money across the board, as well as just build back sort of communities and lives, and to the expungement of people who are in jail or have convictions, everything from probation to child support to people in the military. This decriminalization line that Joe Biden is pushing doesn't go far enough, and we need to really push him and hold him to the line, because, as you say, it's still a way in to arrest Black and brown communities. So if you remove that, then you add into that the fact that cannabis tax revenue can be used as a form of economic reinvestment, reparations, whatever we want to call it, to rebuild all these communities that were harmed. You have a double win on both sides that defunds the police, puts money into care, into education, into social services that is desperately needed, as well as we're putting money back into all the communities that were redlined and all these other sort of systemic systems that are part of this policing and sort of supremacist sort of world that we built around us. That's the conversation that we need to be having. You know, we were talking to Opal from Black Lives Matter, we're talking about other people, and we're all like, yeah, this is the biggest line item that can be removed from police budgets if we just get this right and start to and use this as a moving point and a starting point to have those conversations. And for the company, you know, we've been talking about this. We you guys, and for COVID, it was great to see you all. It's good to see you all again. And for the last year, you know, we always, when we started the business, like, our true north was always, we need to do what's right for our community. We also recognize that, you know, cannabis shouldn't be illegal for anyone globally or hemp, but it's our communities that are being harmed the most. So how do we change that? And also, how do we talk about, you know, we talk about the tool. I love the fact that, yes, it was, you know, I forgot his name. I'm not sure it was Anslinger or whoever wrote that piece, Natalie, but like, he is like, cannabis and jazz and all of music was tied together. And yes, and it's part of the creative tool that we've had as a society for so long to help us inspire and create and feel better and deal with so many pain and struggle. And that's a good thing, because society's lost one of the most creative tools we've had that helps us relax, helps us get into the flow state, helps us connect to our voice and find our voice and express ourselves in so many ways for so many issues. That's not a bad thing. And that's something we need to also fight for and look at. And that's what our new brand, Frank White, and the new stuff from Creativity Tool. So that's what we're doing. We want to, because, you know, both his parents were public about their cannabis. His dad, you know, famous on his cannabis use, but, you know, and that's a good thing. So we want to kind of embrace that and change society's sort of point of view around. We have a plant that helps you be yourself and express yourself. We should be researching and studying that and honoring that in a way that we haven't. So thank you all so much for having us here. It's great to, you know, just kind of be with a major group of people who are all recognizing that there are a lot of big systemic issues we have to deal with on many levels. At the same time, we need to deal with the big elephant in the room, which is this plan has been illegal because of race from the beginning. And we have to change that as quickly as possible.
CJ and Willie, I'm loving it. Let's see if we have anything. Oh, just to let you guys know, I don't know what happened, but my video is now down, but you can still hear me. So I'm not that important anyway. Daryl, what does the chat look like?
Okay, I'm glad you're here, Senator Benjamin, because these questions seem to be directed to you for guidance, and I'm sure you can provide some. One from Mr. Santiago, I'll just say Mr. Santiago. He says, hello to everyone, greetings. For someone like myself who is interested in opening a dispensary and grow house, what laws are there to help start this type of business? Are there any laws that allow recreational grow houses?
The answer to that is no. So that's what we're talking about. Recreational marijuana. How we have in New York, there is a bill that's sponsored by Liz Krueger in the Senate and Crystal Peoples-Stokes in the House that we are trying to come to agreement on. There have been numerous conversations about trying to have this in the budget that have failed in multiple sessions. I believe ultimately we are going to have to do this and provide it to the governor, and that's where we are. So the answer to the question is no, we don't have it. I just want to say though, because I have a number of concerns, and I don't know if now's the right time. I don't know if we're going to finish the other questions, but one of the questions that I still keep coming back down to is where is the money in this? Because one of the things that I've been hearing from a number of people is that if we just because we legalize marijuana doesn't mean that will stop illegal marijuana because of all of the potential taxes and fees and the cost that would be associated with legal product versus illegal product. Then obviously the retail, where's the dispensaries and the fact that the existing infrastructure that's already illegally in place doesn't, if it's cheaper to do that there might be some issues. So I'm still not completely sure that I'm clear on the full business model, which is what I'm still trying to figure out, which is part of my concern. I have watched, numerous specials. I saw the 60 Minutes piece where they talked about what's going on in some other states. And I have some real concerns about, are we, how this should best be done to make sure, A, the right people are getting the opportunities, and B, that it's even going to do some of the things that Brother Wallace was talking about. Because if you have a legal market, but it's not being utilized because the legal market is more efficient, cheaper, or whatever it is, we could still have the same problem.
Thank you, thank you, Senator Benjamin. I'm sure that this forum will help along those lines because we have a groundswell of individuals who will be beneficial in helping to solve that issue because that's why we're doing this. The second question, of course, Mr. Senator Benjamin, is for you as well. And it's, will we have an opportunity to participate in a vertical integration business in cannabis? What we're hearing, Albany is looking only at offering horizontal integration into the Black community.
Yeah, so one of the things that people have been very clear about is that vertical makes it hard for people of color to compete, and that we need to have a number of different licenses with different specialties. I'm totally fine with that. What I guess I'm gonna reiterate a part of my first point just now. I'm just still not clear on, how many licenses are too much? How do you do it in a way where you don't sort of have a lot of diversity, but no one's making any money, so it doesn't really work? I'm not, and I don't, and maybe part of the answer is, we should just sort of authorize this and then appoint someone else to figure it out. But I just don't know. I'm still struggling with all that. And one of the things that I'm still trying to figure out is, what does anyway, let me not get into all that. I think the answer to the question is there's a lot of difference of opinion. I personally side with the idea that we should be more horizontally than vertically. Just because I want to make sure that there's more opportunities. But I just want to understand even that better, because we can have a lot of people with opportunity, but no one's making money. And then at that point, what are we really doing? So that's sort of where my thoughts. I don't know if someone has other thoughts on that. I'm not an expert.
Before we move on, thank you so much, Mr. Senator Benjamin. There's one question now for Mr. Wallace, and I think that should be asked. What is the best way for an entrepreneur to get involved in the cannabis industry? Is Think Big only a cannabis social justice platform? Do you sell cannabis-infused products? And if you do, are you open to any private label or co-branding opportunities?
Oh, great question.
Wow. Great question. So we're going to go back further to the next question for Senator Benjamin because it relates to the second question as well. So on the topic of vertical integration, specifically in the state of New York, the idea that, let's just talk about it on a very clear sense. So I think right now the proposed legislation is 10 vertical integration licenses that you have to be grandfathered in. So that means that every company that already has a medical license gets a vertical integration license. They're the only ones that get to have it. So that right there just sets the playing field completely in their hands because now they can grow, sell, manufacture, distribute across the board. So their price, so just on a basic level, their price for cannabis is going to always be lower than anyone else in the state. So they're going to always have an unfair advantage, no matter what you no matter. So either you're buying from them, which means we're never going to own the supply. So just imagine if this was cotton. It's like you can't own the cotton field, but you can make T-shirts and sell them, but you never ever own the physical material. You never own the raw material. So that already sets off for the rest of the industry in New York unfair advantage for every Black person because you're going to be competing against, let's say, a big vertically integrated company that can maybe grow cannabis at an eighth is like $5 an eighth, but you have to pay $15 an eighth. So you're never going to be able to make up for that loss in revenue from a margin standpoint. So that alone is one reason why. We say it's going to be vertical integration. If they only want to have 10 to limit the amount of people in the state, that should go to sort of grandfather clauses and have to go to new social equity applicants. There needs to be an equal number of vertical integration licenses and teams that support that and funding to support the success of those holders so that they can be competitive in the market. That way, all Black people can, all the Black entrepreneurs and Black cannabis owners can say, you know what, if I would, it would be better for them buying cannabis from 5 Black vertically integrated cultivators and then doing the horizontal integration across the other products. As we talk about other products,
Right.
Think Big is not just a social platform. We'll talk about Frank White.
Yeah. Frank White will really be more focusing on cannabis. We just launched Frank White back in May.
Yeah.
For my dad's birthday to honor him. And, you know, Frank White is the creative house. That's where we will partner with fashion brands and content. I want to do a lot of different things. We're filming a documentary about the entire process. Music as well, you know. So, no, it's not just a cannabis brand. Cannabis is the only thing that I'm interested in. It flows into every other industry. So that was one of the main things that we were focusing on, and just trying to not box ourselves in as just cannabis brand. So.
And to the second part of the question, are we looking for partnerships? Yeah. So the way we're structuring the business is, you know, we're starting in California because that's where we are, and it's legal here. Sadly, not New York yet. You know, we're working with licensed producers to do partnerships for special products. We'll take that same model and say, okay, who are these social equity applicants, Black applicants in other states that we can work with to potentially do co-branding, licensing deals, bring the Frank White brand there and develop products with them in addition to other sort of non-cannabis products. So the whole CBD space, CBG, CBD, all the other health and wellness sides, there's a market on that side. You know, we're in a brand, so for us, we're starting at home. So there's you know, there are Black people, people of color, the diaspora huge. So sort of service them in the long term and look at sort of representing what we represent as a business, but also representing products that are really formulated for our people and for our culture.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because have you guys read the bill that we have in the Senate and in the Assembly? Are y'all familiar with this bill? Okay.
We are.
Because by the way, I think what Willie just said was a very powerful point, and you know, I just don't know how many conversations that we're having from, you know, because most of my colleagues are more focused on the social equity part. Let's be frank. Okay, so I think there needs to be some real education on the business piece of this, and that's the part I need to still figure out. I'm sold. We can talk for days about the social equity piece. I'm already there. I got it. Great. But I'm not clear on this part. I mean, are you asking that we should do 10 social equity I need like language. I need like markup. This is what y'all need to change this to make this work. That's what
I'm going to jump right in here for a second, okay? Because Think Big said, yes, we need to level the playing field. Remember the name of this webinar, that came from Think Big, okay? If medical marijuana has 10 licenses, vertical licenses, then social equity applicants should have 10 licenses. HBA and us went even further because there are about 15 most harmed communities in New York State, 7 of which are actually in New York City. So each most harmed community should have their own vertical license. Now, when we come to the money, you heard it in the introduction, the legislation has to be written such that it makes it easy, okay, or it's written to make sure that social equity works. And now, where is the money coming from? If you're an investor, you want to invest, and we have Kareem Webb from Fourth Movement. He has a model, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to figure out how to put together a model. If it's not Kareem's model, another model, and we can always have 2 or 3, okay, to make sure that we have the finances to do what we're asking to do. And at the end of the day, Senator Benjamin, some money needs to come from the state. It's just, you know, come on. Okay?
My only point, and Kareem, I'll let you speak. My only point is, look, I need the answers from you guys. That's what I need, right? And so I am very clear on what I know and what I don't know. I don't know this business. I don't know how it works. I know the product, but I don't know the mechanics, okay? And so for me, I just really feel like it would be like, people keep saying, oh, well, Brian, what do you need? Well, why don't you sign on? And I'm like, well, because I don't like it. Well, I don't have an answer. And so I need help with the answer. And I can promise you, there are some of my colleagues that if I came to them with an answer, say, listen, the problem with this bill is bang, 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 we need to do da, 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 da. They'll be like, okay, great, let's do that. So there are a lot of Black and brown members who are just signed on because they believe that we should legalize marijuana, but they're not wedded to whatever that is. If we as a community say, this is what we need for economic equity, right? This is what we need, then, we would jump behind that. And that's really what I'm trying to figure out, why I'll hop on any call you want, because I just need, this is the bill language we got. How do we need to change this language to get to an answer that is appropriate for our community? And and I'm finished. I'm done after that. That's it.
Senator Benjamin, that's actually like my last presentation. So, and my last presentation is actually say no to CERTA, change MRTA. So hopefully I will be able to answer your questions.
Yeah,
but I just want to talk about a comment that I'm watching go by here. And not that we're going to spend time on the conversation, but just to put it out there to everyone. Somebody said, why not just make weed a gig economy, like Uber and Lyft and everybody else? And in all honesty, when it comes to legacy and when it comes to entrepreneurship, our legacy operators are off the chain. They have a model that I'm sure we are so lucky to have a legacy operator here today. And we will let her share all of her information. So if everybody is finished with this segment, I'm going to have to move us along and turn it back over to Natalie, who is going to be the moderator between us and the legacy operator. Natalie?
Hi, Maria, I have a question. Just because we're on the subject of vertical integration and sort of making the economics of this work, would there be any chance that I would switch up the program and actually introduce Kareem so he can speak to his economic model? Because I think that might be really interesting for the attendees, and then we can introduce DJ.
Go right ahead. I'm chomping at the bit to talk to you.
Okay. Yes. So I will let Kareem introduce himself, but Kareem is the CEO of Fourth Movement, and he has, I hate to use this word because I feel like it's used too much, but a very innovative model for financing and facilitating entrepreneurship amongst Black communities in the cannabis industry. And I will use as a teaser, and he can tell everyone more about himself and his Fourth Movement.
Well, thank you, Natalie, for the introduction. And I'm just grateful to be able to listen into this conversation, let alone maybe share a few things that we're up to and what we believe about what may be in our interest as it relates to this opportunity. First of all, in every jurisdiction, cannabis is a limited license opportunity. So I'm like a franchisee of Buffalo Wild Wings. Anybody can open up right across the street a Wingstop or anything else and compete. In this space, it's a limited amount of opportunity to operate. So what I think is inherently in our interest is that we leverage the most of each one of these opportunities to have the most impact, restorative impact on our communities. We have been disproportionately impacted by the application of criminal justice around cannabis. So how do we reverse engineer how we get the most economic, socioeconomic, and all of the things that go around with the generation of resources from each one of these licenses or opportunities, whether we talk about vertical integration or not. When you look at vertical integration, especially in colder states like in New York, you're talking about indoor grows. And to do indoor grows competitively, you're talking about $30 million for the grow in and of itself. So we've seen these, what they call MSOs or multi-state operators, all 10 of the all-white companies that are licensed in the state of New York that all have ties to Wall Street and come from, white folks that worked on Wall Street, had access to capital, and were able to capitalize businesses to go get vertical, and none of them have met expectations and have made it so that the entire industry has tightened up in terms of access to capital because they perform so miserably. That is what is happening with vertical integration generally. So I think the horizontal approach and the limiting of the influence of the first movers who are already in business and are in a position to lobby for policy and to mitigate whatever advantage comes from quote unquote social equity programming in order to make sure they maintain as much advantage as possible is something that we've got to look out for in any policy. That's number one. Number two, it's in their interest that social equity licenses end up being distressed assets. So if you are undercapitalized, you will get an asset that you will be willing to sell at some point in time to someone who is in a position to leverage that asset to go make a lot of money, and is not going to be a Black or brown person that cares about displacement, gentrification, and reinvesting in community, has the character and the moral aptitude to be able to behave in a way that's in the interest of Black and brown people in our own communities, which what we want from these licenses. So we've got to, it's inherently in our interest to make certain that however we legislate the opportunity, that folks have an idea for what's going to happen that is viable with each one of these opportunities and can attract the capital necessary to compete at the highest level. So if there's 100 licenses, 200 licenses, 300 licenses, 500 licenses in a state like New York, I mean, when you look at the number of human beings that consume cannabis based upon your population on a per license basis, that's still a very huge opportunity, even with 500 opportunities to do retail, delivery sales, et cetera, et cetera. But each one of those opportunities have to be capitalized, and they have to be able to be in the hands of someone or a group that itself has the acumen and the capacity to activate against that opportunity well, and or there are systems, and services surrounding those individuals to help them be successful. This is what we know about Black and brown people. Every retail that we go into in our community, if you go into Rite Aid, if you go into your grocery store, if you go to a Buffalo Wild Wings, McDonald's, or any place, it's a Black or a brown person that's the general manager. They're doing all of the inventory, the scheduling, the managing 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 people plus to do high volume numbers and managing businesses. Where we don't compete typically is access to capital, being able to have the wherewithal to do leases, not, in the areas that don't give you the best chance to be successful, but where is the highest volume, best retail location, white or Black, right? We know what it's like to have people from outside our community come to our community, make money, go back to their community, beautify it. We want to be on Fifth Avenue too, right? Doing the best business, coming back to our communities and competing for what our communities look like. So in Forest Movement, I come from a franchise background in the Buffalo Wild Wing space. And so we set up something very similar where we 100% finance people, and they're the majority equity owners of these businesses, but we do the HR and the accounting. And because of our platform, we're able to go compete like white folks and go get money to capitalize the opportunity and then go compete at the highest level of the game. And there are many different ways, co-op models and others, as long as the expertise is there to go execute against the opportunity, make the most of the opportunity, and then be committed to do the right thing with the resources. And it's a very difficult thing to legislate. I know, as I'm looking at our senator, it's a very difficult thing to legislate, especially when there are going to be thousands, tens of thousands of people in New York, more people that want the opportunity, who are voters, than are going to be able to get the opportunity. So you inherently going to piss a lot of people off. And then have to figure out how to legislate this opportunity. But I just hope that we all keep in mind what's long-term in our interest is keeping those licenses in our community, being operated by folks who are going to do what's in our interest, and they don't become distressed assets where people from outside our community end up owning them and making all the money.
Natalie, you have anything to say? Kareem, I know, he's just wonderful. Thank you.
I can say something because
I would like to just say
Maria,
something because
okay.
Kareem just actually said something very true, and I want to elaborate on it. He was talking about having the expertise to run a company. And, you know, I've been working for or with and consulting with HBA since 1998. And they came up with a model they called the Back Office Support Initiative. And they came up with this initiative because they kept looking at or listening to all of the justifications why contractors could not get city contracts. And one of the reasons was because they may know how to use a hammer, but they don't know how to run a company. So having organizations like the HBA who actually want to put like the CEO, the CFO, and everybody else in a company for 6 months, if they have the ability to do so, so you can train the owner in what's required, how to hire people, or Kareem's model, which is even, you know, it's wonderful where, you know, you walk into a working business and just have to run it. That is, I just wanted to put that out there. So go right ahead, Senator. I'm sorry.
No. You know, one thing that, first of all, I think Kareem mentioned, like, all the things I'm like kind of like stumbling on in my head, you were articulating. So first of all, thank you for helping me to know I'm not crazy about my concerns. The point you raised that I was really struck by was this whole idea of us possibly legislating distressed assets for social equity applicants. To me, that is like akin to death. So one of the things that is hard to figure out if you're not in the business is what would not allow that, right? And so I think that's where people like me need assistance from those who have experience in the industry, so that we don't legislate something, feel good about it, but we are literally legislating something that is setting our own people up for failure before they even get started. And and meanwhile, to the points that have already been raised, some other folks, medical marijuana licensees, boom, they're gone. They already have the infrastructure, everything set up, and they're off to the races. And then we trying to figure out what's happening by the time, you know, they have already, you know, cornered 80% of the market or whatever it is, of the legal market, because I still believe it's going to be a legal market. Y'all know better than me, but I'm still trying to figure out how the legal market goes away. But thank you for that. And those are the kinds of things that will help people like me.
The last thing I want to leave you with, as you mentioned that, I want to say this too, especially in New York, because we're going to see the same thing there in New York as we see in Illinois now, right? Where there's 300 tons of demand, 300,000 tons of demand in Illinois, and even just what is currently entitled, it's not even built yet, is only 100,000 tons of supply, right? And so in these states where there's not outdoor grow in a plethora of supply, like California or Oregon, you're going to see the same thing, because you're not going to be able to onboard enough cultivation, and you can't cross state lines with product. So the micro license and the ability for people to set up smaller grows, because the cost of the commodity is going to be significantly higher in New York for a long time, especially in the regulated market. So yeah, you're always going to have you know, an unregulated market presence and people who are you know, operating in the unregulated market. But as you license more businesses, you know, you're going to find people and people will onboard into cannabis. Behaviors are going to change around the use of cannabis even more aggressively. The people that you're familiar with around cannabis are connoisseurs. They smoke a lot. They've been doing it prior to, but the calorie replacement, edible people, like what happens when your state goes, when New York goes recreational or adult use, is a lot more usage in people that aren't going to consume in the illicit market. They're going to consume in the regulated market. So yeah, be thinking about from a policy perspective, how do you get as many Black people on the cultivation side as possible? Because that's where a lot of money is going to get made in the first 10 years.
But isn't the regulated market going to be more expensive with the taxes and this and that than the unregulated market? I mean,
It is, but there's so many, you guys are so dense. New York is so dense that if you open a dispensary and it's competitive, it's going to be doing $20 million a year. It's going to be doing real dollars. If you have the technology, you got the delivery platform, you know, it looks like every other retail experience that you have. The density is going to take care. Both can be true at the same time. It's going to be.
I got you. Yeah. Okay.
So, Natalie.
Maria, I am not able to hear you.
Natalie, you can't hear me? Well,
okay, now you're on.
Okay. We're getting a little, I don't know if it's who it is, but if it's everyone, we have a little latency and interference. But go ahead.
All right, so, you know, this brings up a really interesting point, talking about what happens post-legalization, especially with our traditional or legacy operators. And very excited to introduce a woman who is a friend of mine and who currently operates in the traditional market. So that's a little bit why there's a cloak and dagger sort of situation going on right now. For the purposes of this conversation, I will call her DJ, and she's going to share a little bit about her experience in the traditional market. And then, you know, I know we're coming up on time, so we need to go through this quickly, but if there's a little time, maybe she can share some of her thoughts as to what she would need in terms of legislation and capital in order to transition into the regulated market.
Good evening, everyone, panelists, organizers. Special thank you to Natalie Papillon of Equity Org for getting me involved. I'm honored to speak to you all today about my experience as a legacy market operator. And like Natalie said, for security purposes, I'll go by the name DJ. I've been actively operating in New York City and the greater New York regions for the last 4 years. I own a cannabis lifestyle brand that provides THC-infused edibles and other culinary compounds like oils, tinctures, and sweeteners to people that want to self-medicate in the comfort of their own homes. The demographic of my customer base ranges from 18 years old to 64 years old, with 60% being women and 40% being men. As of today, 25% of my customers need cannabis specifically for medical reasons, while the other 85% use recreationally and prefer it over smoking due to respiratory concerns, wanting to medicate discreetly, or just for the prolonged high, or they just prefer it in the form of something that they can enjoy eating. At the peak of the COVID pandemic in New York, I experienced the sharpest influx in sales in my entire 4 years of operating. Since the beginning of 2020, I have been able to hire 2 employees that assist with my entire operation as my volume continues to increase. So how did I figure this out? Basically through a lot of trial and error and civic engagement. So when my business was a premature idea, I was just a recreational smoker at the time, and I was a full-time college student. I didn't qualify for any financial aid, but I was determined to not take out any more loans for school, so I worked. I paid my tuition out of pocket, and I was working 3 jobs, 2 of which were at temp agencies to make ends meet, but it never felt like it was enough. There were times I had to make a choice between day, filling my gas tank, and paying my bills on time. I felt like I was kind of like a hamster on a wheel running towards a goal, but never actually reaching it. So in high school, I used to make edible brownies and cupcakes for my friends, for birthdays or kickbacks, and people always liked them. So that's kind of when I had the aha moment, and I decided to dedicate myself to learning the science behind the cannabis plant. I took a comprehensive horticulture course offered through CTU, Cannabis Training University. Some of you may be familiar with that. And then I began experimenting in my own kitchen. Now, I'm fully aware of the legal consequences of getting involved in this industry, which is why I opted to take this route with edibles rather than trying to distribute flower, just because it's just as lucrative and more discreet. My challenges right now are finding, and even in my case, creating resources that will propel me forward into the legal market. Just being a Black woman in this industry, it's kind of insulting to see all the people that are being recognized for their innovations and their businesses in cannabis, but they don't look like me. The reason why I'm going by this alias right now while even addressing these issues is because I don't feel protected as a human being, even before a business owner. Law enforcement won't think twice to shut me down, and it's still happening, even though cannabis is supposed to be decriminalized in New York. Just last year, I was issued a citation for having a joint on my person, and the court was offering me 1 year probation, but I knew better than that, and I knew that that was a built-in kind of loophole, because by the nature of my business, the likelihood that I would have gotten stopped again by a police officer was very likely, and that second encounter would not be a slap on the wrist or a citation. So luckily, in that situation, the DA that was in court that day advised me to return to court on a later date, where another judge would preside, and he was more lenient towards cannabis cases. So I did just as the DA said, and the judge dismissed my case. He was also a Black judge. I think I'd like to point that out. But just knowing that something like that could have hindered me or tarnished my name or my brand or my growth are things that I think about on a daily basis. These are the dangers that I have to consider. Every day I go outside, I'm taking a risk. And I see businesses that I aspire to grow to be like, but they're ran by white folks. And because they have the privilege of their capital and their skin color, they don't have a lot of the challenges that I have. That's it. That's my spiel.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, DJ. And, you know, I have some questions, but I want to be cognizant of time. So maybe, I know we have a few more presenters, and then if there's still appetite towards the end, we can come back, and I'd love to learn more about what you feel you would need to be able to transition smoothly into the regulated market were it to come to fruition in New York.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank you, DJ. We are going to move over to Deborah Hoskins, Esquire, and she is going to give us the benefit of her experience. Deborah is a uniquely experienced media and entertainment attorney with broad experience in growing revenues and profits through creation of new businesses. Deborah, talk to us. How are you?
Okay, I'm well, thank you. Every minute aspect of the cannabis business has significant legal involvement and consequences. And I was asked to speak today on the issues to be considered when starting a new business in the cannabis industry, and I've been given 3 minutes. So I'll just be able to skip through what I think might be the most important points. Starting any new business requires a great deal of work to prepare, create, and operate your new enterprise. This is very true also for the cannabis business, with the added bonus of extreme regulatory oversight and taxation. Assuming that you have already determined that you are up for the task of owning and running your own business, the first thing you need to think about is what aspect of this business you're interested in. Not everybody wants to be a seller. The licenses will be issued for growers, and that includes all the cultivation and harvesting. Laboratories, which basically test for pesticides and THC levels. Processors who extract the good stuff out of the plants and then turn it into oils or gummies or whatever it's going to be. Distributors, who are your wholesalers, and dispensaries, which are your retail outlets. Each have different licensing requirements, and you need to make sure that you and the other owners can meet the regulatory and financial requirements for that level of business. Then a determination should be made as to what type of entity or corporation you want to form. With other industries, that decision, with other industries, that decision is usually a tax decision. However, in the cannabis business, your source of funding is going to influence that decision. Investors might not just want you to pay them back with interest. What I've seen is that they also want equity, which is ownership, an ownership position in your business. So they meaning your investors, might actually dictate the type of business, corporation, entity that they are willing to fund, and you're going to go where you can get money, obviously. So if you're not independently wealthy, you're going to need to find a dependable funding source. And to do that, you're going to need a very good business plan. A business plan for a jewelry store might be 20 pages. The last cannabis business plan I made was 104 pages. So it's extensive. And you should know that even after you have diligently priced everything out for your financial statement, whatever amount of money you think you're going to need, you might need about twice that much in the real world. Okay. Next, you need to consider your location, because the location of your business and even the name you choose for your business are all regulated and limited by the law. You have to understand that marijuana is still a controlled substance under the federal law, which is why the federal government taxes the gross income on your cannabis business, not allowing you to deduct your operating expenses such as payroll or rent or electricity or any of those things that you're used to deducting in your flower shop business or any other business that does not involve a controlled substance. You're going to need to align yourself with experts in the field that can navigate you through the many, many pitfalls of starting a new business. And once started, you're going to need those experts and even others to help you stay compliant so that you don't lose your license once you have obtained it. And let's not kid ourselves that this level of oversight is not for everyone. Also, there are members of our community who will never be able to qualify for these licenses, but there are still business opportunities in this arena that don't require physically touching the product and therefore do not need controlled substance licensing. You can make a unique niche for yourself in a B2B business that caters to the cannabis industry. Invent a baggie that is childproof and doesn't leak a smell. That's a good business, okay? Use your graphic art skills to make logos and advertisements for marijuana sellers. That's a good business. You can create a niche for yourself in the cannabis industry without being licensed, okay? With the skills that you already have. Let's see. The field is wide open, the possibilities are large, and I'm way over my 3 minutes, but I did want to address something that Senator Benjamin said. I have quite a large criminal law practice, and my survey of some of my clients tells me that there will not be a significant change in the retail business that already exists once you pass the legalization laws. What you will have is a tremendous amount of business from people who now do not use recreationally for the only reason that it's not legal. But once it's legal, you're going to have a tremendous amount of people that are going to say, okay, now I can do it. And that's where I think the largest portion of the profits are going to come from, because I do not think legacy is going to stop their ability to pay rent just because you made something legal.
You go, girl. You know, thank you. And it was 4 minutes. You must have seen 3 minutes like 2 run-up shows ago. So, I mean, if everyone has the time, you know, Zoom doesn't have a cutoff. There are a lot of questions for Deborah. And I think that Daryl.
Okay, I can condense some of these questions for Deborah. Deborah, what is the licensing process for dispensaries in New York, and are small business loans available to people interested in entering this industry?
Well, I'm not aware of any bank that will do that. Mostly because banks have federal all of our commercial banks have federal charters, and it being an illegal controlled substance under federal law, they're just not going to take that chance. But there are investors out there. It's just not that easy. But you know, there are investors out there, and if you have a strong enough business plan, you know, you should be able to attract one. The first part of your question was,
what is the licensing process?
Oh, okay. It's quite a process. But there are you apply, but I could not explain that to you in this format. But there is an application, and there is an application process that's connected to a 119-page piece of legislation. But you do have to know that we are not vertical. The licensing is not vertical for us. If you do a dispensary, you can't do anything else, basically.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. This next question actually can be answered by yourself or anyone who thinks they want to take a stab at it. How will the additional revenue received by the state of New York from cannabis sales be used? Will any of this revenue be shifted to communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system?
Well, that's a big fight, okay? So I know that very intimately. The governor wants the revenue to go towards the general fund that he can then disperse it as he sees fit, and there's a strong opinion in the legislature that money should go towards communities that have been most impacted. So that's a fight. We gotta figure it out. But that's where we are right now in New York State.
Daryl, any more questions? Daryl?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just trying to make sure I get the questions in that are most pertinent. This is a question for Senator Benjamin. Okay, I'm sorry. Senator Benjamin, can you reach out to fellow senators in states like Nevada to get more insight? I was amazed at how the legal dispensaries are operated in Las Vegas. From what I understand, the product was not undercutting street prices.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. But I think my first threshold question is, whatever we set up in New York, I think this distressed asset point is something I really want to make sure I'm clear on. What we're setting up in New York, is it viable? And is there enough for enough folks who are part of communities that have been most harmed, so that we don't create a situation where, yes, we're not getting arrested anymore, it's legal, but all the business is going to outside of the community. So to me, that's the first thing that I'm concerned about. But there's no doubt that we can talk to a number of the other states to find out what they're doing.
And I'm not going to say lastly, because I'm going to just ask this question on behalf of the veterans. Veterans can get street vending licenses, and disabled veterans can receive mobile food permits going on a wait list in New York City. Is it possible to get information to this group on cannabis opportunity?
Who's the question for, Darryl?
That question is for anyone who thinks, well, Senator Benjamin or Deborah, if they can answer that. If not, it's okay. We'll be here again. We'll have a more forum.
I didn't read anything specific with regards to veterans in the new proposed law. So I don't think that question actually can be answered, except that they will be given, as of now, they'll be given the same opportunity that, everybody's given.
I can also say, so in the fight for federal legalization, the veterans movement has probably been one of, if not the most active community, because of desire to be able to access the substance for treatment with PTSD and other adjacent disorders. The Veterans Cannabis Project is a really great resource, and they have a lot of information, not necessarily New York specific, but on the federal level. So I would direct you to them. And a lot of cannabis companies have partners with veterans associations to help circulate that information.
So before we close, I hope I can share my screen now, because I do have a presentation that I need to make, and part of it actually speaks to Senator Benjamin's point of just tell us what we need. So we're moving into the whole say no to CERTA, change MRTA part of the program. I actually intended to split this up between the different panelists, so we didn't get bored. So I'll run through this right now. One of the things that we are very conscious of is terminology. So terminology matters. And the big thing with some programs that have been developed is that there's always a court challenge. Talking about reverse discrimination as if that is really a thing. So we've, looked at the term most harmed, and that's strictly defined as people who've been arrested, convicted, incarcerated for marijuana, or those are individuals, or their family members, or communities that have been impacted. Because, if you take 86% of the community and put them in jail, you're impacting the community. One of the reasons why we don't want to use terms like minorities or MWBEs is because this is the list of all of the people who are included in minority and MWBE. But this shows, according to Controller Scott Stringer, how many of those minorities were arrested for marijuana possession. And as you can see, we're talking about 86%, over 86% Black and Latino, 51.3% Black, 2.9% Asian, yet Asian is considered a minority. So we seriously have to focus the legislation on those individuals who were most harmed. Now, when we talk about the economic realities, Black businesses are under siege in New York. So I want to show you this graph. This graph is also from Scott Stringer's office. And if you see that little green line down here, this is actually the amount of spend Black companies got in 2019. The top bar are white women, the middle, Asian Americans, and Black, and then Hispanic. So again, the economic realities of when you use terms like MWBE is that Black people tend to be on the bottom. And as I said, Black companies are under siege. We Black people in New York City are 22% of the population. We're only 2% of the businesses and 30% of the businesses closed. There's been a 30% decrease in businesses between 2007 and 2012. So when it comes to the legislation, we believe that it should be crafted with a single goal. This is very important. To repair the damage marijuana prohibition has inflicted on those most harmed. The objective should be to prioritize business development, workforce development, and community development, finally creating a facility for wealth attainment and self-sustaining community economic growth. So MRTA stands for Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, and that was first introduced by Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Senator Liz Krueger in 2013, and they've been reintroducing it every session since. CERTA is Governor Cuomo's proposed legislation, which failed in 2019, in a large part due because of inadequate restorative justice provisions. Now, neither bill is perfect, but changing MRTA with the following provisions should make New York State the leader in legalization that recognizes the damage that systemic racism, wealth deprivation, and over-policing has caused the most harmed community. So as I said, say no to CERTA, change MRTA. We would like to be the first and only to market. So we're talking about only issuing adult use licenses to restorative justice applicants for at least a period of 3 years. Now, if there's going to be a court challenge, just don't issue any licenses for 3 years while restorative justice applicants are doing their business plans, finding capital, taking classes, learning the business. So at least by the time they finish doing all of that, they can be competitive because they've done their training. Day one. So I read MRTA and they were talking about creating a board to create a plan after obtaining public input. I don't know that much about Albany, but it sounds like that's going to take a lot of time. So maybe we can do all of that before it's legal. So restorative justice applicants will actually have an opportunity to get in on day one and be first and only. And you know, we talked about the whole vertical integration. You know, it's fine if you only want horizontal integration for everyone else, but I think for restorative justice applicants, they should be allowed to do vertical integration. Now, there is something in there for micro licensing, which does allow for vertical integration on a smaller scale, but we believe, and just as Kareem said, you know, hey, that's where you're going to be the most profitable. So therefore, if we're writing legislation specifically intended to benefit the most harmed, then we need to figure this out. We would like to discuss exclusivity. That means in our most harmed communities, only restorative justice dispensaries, for instance, are allowed to open. You know, and again, you guys do your negotiating, Senator, but we would like exclusivity without, I mean, plus we can go anywhere. So yes, we want to open in Harlem and open on Fifth Avenue if it's in our best interest. But we would prefer some of your current medical marijuana licensees not be able to open in Harlem, at least for a period of time. And then we need business development, and we need a clear way of bringing our legacy operators into, you know, transitioning to a real business. You heard DJ say it, how do I grow? How do I move to the next level legally? I think that, you know, organizations like the Harlem Business Alliance should be tasked with that. We are in the community. We're in the community. I won't say anything more, but we should be able to help legacy operators and any entrepreneur start and grow their business. So that's it for the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Regina to close us out. Unless anybody has any questions or comments. Daryl, is there like a burning question in the chat that we have got to answer?
Actually, I think you guys have done a wonderful job in answering the questions in the chat. Nothing's burning because we put out the fire as I've seen it, but we've also started the movement to solve some of these issues so we can move forward. Thank you very much.
So Regina's going to close out our show. Regina? Regina? Okay.
Okay, sorry. This has been excellent. I'd like to thank everyone who participated. Senator Benjamin, thank you for participating, and we'd be happy to follow up with you to help you to craft the strongest possible legislation that will get us to the goals that we discussed this evening. And I'm sure everyone on this webinar tonight would be interested in helping you to craft that language. So we'll definitely move forward with that. I'd like to thank CJ and Willie. Thank you very much. Natalie, you've been a wonderful partner in helping us to pull together this webinar. DJ, thank you for joining us. Your insights were invaluable, and I'd like to see you grow your business to the highest levels.
Thank you. I received that.
Oh, you're welcome. And Kareem, I watched the Business Club recording that you did, and you're fabulous, and I love the work that you do, and we would love to see you come here and help scale Black businesses in the state of New York and Harlem as well, because the goal is ultimately creating as many millionaires as we possibly can, because we turn around and we hire one another. That's important to the overall economic health and well-being of our communities, and it translates into eliminating the disparities in education, healthcare, hospital care, all of that. So it is critical. And at this point in time, we're in an extreme state of crisis. Maria talked about the percentage of businesses, Black-owned businesses that we have in New York State, which is frankly criminal, that we had 2% before the pandemic, and now we're definitely under 1, okay? So I would also like to thank Maria, because she's done a yeoman's job in pulling together this webinar with the assistance of decorum, and Daryl was wonderful with the Q&A. Natalie, everybody has just been great. Thank you very much. And let's continue this dialogue and let's make this happen and work for our people.
And before we go, we can't forget Deborah, because she actually, you know, she was like a showstopper right there with all those words of wisdom.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Deborah, I mean, you are fabulous. I mean, I'd love to have you as my attorney any day. So, yes, you are fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Deborah, I am now a fan of yours, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you all so much.
Thank
All right.
you.
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy.
And
Thank you, everyone. Good night.